Assertion 6. Faith groups put substantial amounts of money into their schools, so they should be allowed to enjoy the special freedoms they have. Well, they certainly used to. Back in 1944, most church schools were required to pay for half of their capital costs. Over time, however, and without a public debate, this percentage has come down and down and down. Officially, voluntary aided faith schools only have to pay 10% of their capital costs now. However, in reality, these schools are now starting to contribute even less because the government do not expect them to contribute to any improvements that are made to their schools under their Building Schools for Future programme, thus continuing this long-term trend. We all, through the state, almost entirely fund these schools. In return, they retain substantial control and, under the current legal framework, the right to refuse entry to our children. Assertion 7. Parents have the human right to have their children educated in accordance to their religious beliefs. This is one of the most commonly used arguments that you are likely to hear in favour of narrow and exclusive practices in faith schools. In a sense it is true, since the European Convention on Human Rights obliges the state to, and I quote, respect the right of parents to ensure such education and teaching in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. But the state is under no obligation to provide or fund any particular sort of school to provide what parents want. The obligation on the state is merely not to interfere. Furthermore, children also have rights too. The UN's Convention on the Right of the Child states that children in education have the right to, and I quote, to seek, receive and impart information and ideas of all kinds and be prepared for a responsible life in a free society in the spirit of understanding, peace, tolerance, equality of sexes and friendship among all peoples, ethnic, national and religious groups. Well, I don't think that is best accomplished in faith schools that are not currently required, unlike community schools, to teach a more balanced form of religious education. The last defensive assertion I'm going to address that I will also often hear, having faith schools with different religious characters is good for social cohesion. This unproven assertion is often made by minority faith leaders promoting their own state-funded schools. Experience in Scotland and Northern Ireland, however, proves otherwise. I do not claim that exclusive faith schools are responsible for all segregation and intercultural tension. The roots of segregation are often economic, accidental and residential, but it does seem unwise for the state to be actively encouraging religious division by allowing faith schools to only teach children from a particular religious background. And the argument that is so often made for single faith schools improving social cohesion by having exchanges with other faith schools is a rather roundabout way of reaching what could be achieved more simply and effectively in shared schools. Instead, we at the Accord Coalition would like state schools to include children of all faiths and none, enabling them to learn with and from each other. The state should not be allowing faith schools to operate in divisive ways. We will regret this counterproductive use of public money in decades to come. Our society is increasingly diverse and the population as a whole is becoming increasingly secular. Our education system has to adopt itself to this fact. And the privileges for religion that currently exist, and Christianity in particular, cannot be part of that future. I hope you will join me in the fight. Thank you very much.
Different viewpoints, perhaps evident. Some of you may be school goers, I'm sure a lot of you are parents concerned as well. So let's get some questions going. First point, first response to what Paul said. Who's got an observation? Okay, lady there. How did you say who you are?
Yes, Christine Seymour. I'm Paul Mallows. I'm a member of Haven and Sacre Humanist representing. I was intrigued and read about the Accord Coalition And I thought, how do they manage to discuss all this without mentioning faith schools? Because faith, they don't have a policy on faith schools. Well, you haven't attempted to do it without mentioning faith schools. Then what do the coalition do as a whole group?
Sure. Well, we seek to reform faith schools. It's not just faith schools. There are many other aspects of state education that we object to. For example, collective worship, the requirement for all schools to provide worship of wholly and broadly the Christian character every day. But a key focus, and our main focus arguably, is on faith schools. But we don't take a position whether they exist or should exist or not. But we seek to reform the way they operate. And I do think from a humanist perspective, if a core was successful, we would in effect neuter faith schools. We really would take out those parts of faith schools we find most objectionable. And I think it would be a very, very significant reform. I mean, it's an interesting question of strategy that maybe we want to touch upon tonight, but from a humanist perspective, we want an end to faith school. But these schools are owned by churches, by religious trusts and so forth. How would we actually get rid of these schools, even though it's a BHA objective? There are big questions that I'm not sure we ever really answered in detail. These schools are worth maybe, the land, the property is worth 30 billion. Do we have spare 30 billion? So I think from a humanist perspective, it's a very obvious and good route to follow to get real, meaningful reform. And then in the long term, obviously, we can pursue further out. From a humanist perspective, we can pursue further avenues. But yes, we aren't against faith schools, but we focus very much on trying to reform the way in which they operate. Yeah, we talk about social segregation. That's a key argument, I think, that we can use when trying to win over apathetic people.
Thanks to you all as well. Before we go, Alice, this was a couple of minutes of your time about some other events.
30 seconds at the moment. Just to tell you about the upcoming events, we've got on the 7th of July our usual social, which we have on the first Wednesday of every month, as I'm sure you know, which is in the Somerstown Coffee House, which is just by Euston, in between Euston and King's Cross, so just around the corner. On the 21st of July we're planning a Protest the Pope event, which is hopefully going to have a prominent Catholic debating an atheist, so more on that hopefully to come. We're going to have our annual picnic, which we have every year. I think we've had it in, is it Russell Square? Bedford Square. We're not having that there this year because we need the keys and we can't get it off the movie. But we're going to have the picnic somewhere else in a lovely garden somewhere. The date will be circulated at some point.
Interesting point just made.
Sorry?
Paul said the BHA has a key.
To Bedford Square.
We'll have to look into
The organisation is based in Galsworth, that's how I know.
Okay, well you've got it on video, so and then in August, on the 18th, Edward Hunt, who's the author of A Radical History of Britain, is going to come and talk to us about lots of different radical things. He's a very good speaker, I've heard of him before, and that's everything.
Thanks, Alice. And
Cheers.
There we go.
Cheers!